Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Spears and Shadows by S.C. Grayson, narrated by Eleanor Mccormick. 1. The blisters on Nora's feet throbbed in time with the amplified bass pounding out of the speakers above the crowded bar. Colored lights cut through hazy air, and the song blasting through the room was by some pop star whose name Nora should probably know, but couldn't call to mind. She took a sip of the drink her sister had ordered for her and grimaced when she found it was fruity and cloyingly sweet. It appeared the bar's only saving grace was their hot wings, which Odell had ordered for Nora. Now Odell raised her glass to her sister in a toast. "Cheers to the youngest department head in Chicago Field Museum history." Nora raised the chicken wing in her hand and bumped it against the rim of Odell's martini glass, even as she countered. "Well, I'm not officially department head yet." "It's only a matter of time. Just take the damn compliment," Odell retorted, shaking her head so the neon lights reflected off her sleek platinum bob. "You nailed your presentation and got funding for your project restoring those weapons from ancient Greece. Although maybe I should get some of the credit too. I bet those dull old fogies at the museum would have given you the funding for your project no matter what you said, as long as you stood up there wearing the outfit I selected." "I'm sure you're right, Psycha," Nora commented, intentionally not bringing up the myriad of blisters caused by the heels her sister had picked out. "The museum board decides what departments get funding solely based on how much they want to sleep with the person presenting the pitch. Now I understand why the paleontology department always gets all the money. I mean, have you seen Bert?" Odell snorted in an unladylike manner. "Of course. Big gray tufts of ear hair have always been my greatest turn-on." Nora smiled as she polished off the wing in her hand and licked the sauce from between her fingers. "In all seriousness, though, thank you for your help with the presentation. Getting to restore these artifacts all but guarantees I'll get that department head promotion I've been gunning for. I mean, seriously, Leo keeps trash-talking me to the board, saying I'm too young for the position. But he hasn't made any contributions this big since he ran that mummy through an MRI machine almost 5 years ago." Okay, Odell cut in. "Now is not the time to start in on all the drama. If I let you vent about department politics, I'll be here until I have gray ear tufts of my own." Nora bit back her retort, knowing her sister had listened to her go on about the dramas of academia enough in the past. Besides, she had promised her sister that tonight would be a celebration, and she wouldn't spend the entire time talking about work, as much as she would prefer to be thinking about work these days. Instead, she asked, "Did you have to wear the tall prosthetics plus the shoes? Isn't that a touch redundant?" Tonight, Odell had chosen to wear the pair of sculpted prosthetic legs that made her 6 feet tall, then proceeded to add a pair of killer heels to the ensemble. The finished product had the effect of making Odell look like a veritable Amazon. "What's the point of having feet made of carbon fiber if I don't take advantage of it by wearing fantastic shoes? Besides, I like feeling as if I could eat men alive." Nora nodded over her drink. "Speaking of which, that one over there looks as if he wouldn't mind being eaten alive." Odell glanced over her shoulder at the tanned Ken doll of a man who eyed her from a few feet away. Seeing her looking, he approached and slid himself onto the empty bar stool next to them. Nora smiled and took another sip of her drink, suppressing a grimace again at the overpowering sweetness as Odell struck up a conversation. Nora caught the bartender's eye and waved him over to order herself a dirty martini as her sister continued to flirt. Just as the bartender arrived with her drink, Nora's phone vibrated in her back pocket. She fished it out of her jeans and frowned at the illuminated screen. Even as she read the message from the emergency notification system at work, her phone buzzed in her hand again, with several new texts popping up on the screen from coworkers. They immediately began arguing about whose job it was to go in and check on things. Nora didn't hesitate before typing a message of her own. As soon as it was sent, she turned back to Odell to explain that she had to leave, but her sister was still otherwise occupied. Odell had leaned in towards her admirer, and he was reaching out to put a hand on her knee, just below the hem of her short black dress. He clearly hadn't noticed that she had hinges instead of knees in the dim light of the bar, too distracted by Odell's coy smile. Nora smirked despite herself when the man jumped as his hand encountered a cool carbon fiber instead of warm skin. He raised his eyebrows a fraction, but Odell gave him a wicked grin and continued their conversation. Nora tapped Odell on the shoulder to get her attention. "Hey, Zyka, I have to go. There is a security breach at work, and I need to go deal with it," Nora explained, already slipping on her leather jacket. "Girl, you do not know how to take a break. It's supposed to be your night off." "Comes with the territory of getting promoted," Nora countered as she grabbed a few crumbled bills out of her purse and put them on the bar. "I've got to show people I can handle the responsibilities. You stay and enjoy yourself. It looks like you aren't quite done breaking that poor man's heart." Indeed, Odell's admirer was obviously appreciating the fit of Odell's dress as the women spoke. "Oh, I'm not," Odell admitted. "But he can wait. I'm coming to the museum with you to make sure you don't stay too late." Odell fished a pen out of her purse and grabbed the man's wrist. His brows drew together in puzzlement before he smirked at the realization that she was scribbling her number on the back of his hand. Nora sighed. If she knew Odell, she would lead this man on for the next 2 weeks before realizing he didn't have the brains to keep up with her. Then she'd leave him hanging. "All right, let's get out of here," Odell said as she grabbed Nora's elbow to start weaving towards the exit. Just before they slipped into the crowd, Odell looked over her shoulder and shot a wink at the enamored man whose gaze still followed them. Nora chuckled as they pushed towards the door. That poor man. He's not going to know what hit him. As the cab pulled up outside the museum, Nora's stomach clenched with unease. Red and blue flashing lights filtered in through the car windows. She threw open the door and pushed her way into the chilly air as Odell handled paying the driver. Wrapping her scarf around her neck to combat the cold night air, Nora made her way over to the nearest squad car. "Excuse me, sir?" Nora asked. "What's going on here? I work at the museum and got an alert about a security breach." The police officer looked rather uninterested as he answered, "A bunch of security alarms went off in an office on the lower level. Called in the emergency services automatically. We've searched the whole area, but there's nobody around." The officer shrugged as he continued, "Must have been a glitch in the system." "Well, I work at an office on the lower level. Can I at least go in and make sure that nothing was damaged or stolen? We store a lot of priceless artifacts down there." "That would be perfect, actually." The officer's tone turned grateful. "We need somebody to confirm that nothing was taken before we can leave the scene. You can go inside and take stock." Nora dug through her purse for her office keys as she wove her way through the parked squad cars to the main entrance. Before she could make it to the bottom of the museum steps, Odell strode up behind her and grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "Going inside to make sure nothing was damaged, of course." Odell looked at her like she had grown a third arm. "You can't go in there. What if the burglar is still inside?" Yes, I can," Nora said, turning and continuing her march up the steps. "Besides, the police said they swept the area and it was empty." Odell continued to follow her. "Well then, I'm coming with you." Nora sighed but did not slow her walking. "You're just coming with so you can be the first reporter on the scene. Get the inside scoop on any big news before anybody else gets wind of it." "Well, maybe," Odell admitted, not sounding the least bit contrite. "But somebody also has to protect you. You may specialize in ancient weaponry, but you would be useless in actual combat." "And you plan on fighting off a burglar in those shoes?" Odell seemed unconcerned. "If Wonder Woman can figure it out, then so can I." Nora chuckled as she led them into the darkened museum. "You know," she commented as they passed the looming Tyrannosaurus Rex in the main entrance, which looked haunting in the dim lighting, "I've always wanted to come in here at night, see if the dinosaurs and mummies come alive when we aren't looking." "Stop joking around," Odell scolded her without venom, the click of her heels echoing as they made their way down the steps to the basement. "This is a crime scene." "It's not a crime scene. It's just the scene of a glitch in the security system." As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Nora grew warm and was forced to loosen the scarf around her neck. Even then, a bead of moisture trickled down the small of her back. As if she had heard her thoughts, Odell asked, "Is it just me, or is it really hot down here?" "It's not just you." Nora unzipped her jacket. "Maybe there's some sort of problem with the boiler. That might have tripped the security system." "Is that even possible?" Nora asked as they reached the door to her office. Just as she moved to unlock it, a slight shuffle at the other end of the hallway grabbed her attention. She whirled towards the sound, eyes straining to see any movement in the darkness. Just as she was about to turn back to her office door, scolding herself for being skittish, a dark shape shifted, moving towards the loading docks. Nora froze once more, her hand snaking out to grab Odell's wrist. Understanding the unspoken message, she remained silent. There was a tense moment where both the intruder and Nora seemed to acknowledge their awareness of the other's presence. The hot air was preternaturally still, as if the whole world was watching to see who would break the silence first. Then, the intruder bolted. Nora took off after him without a second thought, dashing down the hallway, all the blisters on her feet forgotten in the adrenaline of the moment. She barreled after him, combat boots pounding against the concrete floor. He was heading toward the loading docks, where there was a back door he could use as an escape. The figure was tall and lean, with long legs that allowed him to run faster than Nora, but her familiarity with the basement hallways allowed her to keep up. She skidded around several corners, trying to keep him in her line of sight. The intruder crashed out through the back door, Nora following behind. In the open ground of the moonlit back alley, the man was able to gain speed, and it became clear she wasn't going to be able to catch up. Before she could think through the stupidity of her actions, Nora shouted, "Stop!" The word came out a little breathless from her sprint. To her eternal surprise, the man froze, and Nora was taken off guard enough that she skidded to a halt behind him, the soles of her boots scraping against the asphalt. The man's shoulders were tense, as if he were fighting some internal battle. He turned his head as if to look behind him, but stopped halfway. The moment stretched on, but Nora remained frozen, unsure of what to do now that she was no longer chasing the man. As suddenly as he had stopped, the man took off again at a breakneck speed. Nora was about to bolt after him once more when Odell flew through the door behind her and grabbed her arm, halting her. "Solotia, are you crazy?" Odell's voice was breathless, too, but Nora hardly registered it as she watched the man's lanky figure disappear around the corner and into the night. Odell stepped in front of her, getting her attention. "You just bolted away from me. What's gotten into you?" "The man. Didn't you see him?" Odell's eyes narrowed, and she looked towards the end of the alley where Nora was gesturing. "A man?" Nora nodded. "Nora, I didn't see anything." Nora's mouth fell open. "It was probably just too dark for you to see, but I swear there was a man. He ran out here." Odell shook the arm she was still holding. "And you ran after him? He could have had a gun. He could have hurt you." Nora had the sense to look contrite. "I didn't even think of that." Odell clapped a hand to her forehead. "Why am I not surprised by that answer? Come on, let's go find the cops. Maybe they can still catch him." Nora did her best to give the police a description of the man, but she had only seen him from the back, and it had been dark. The officer listened to her story, but Nora got the distinct impression that he had pinned her as a frightened female whose nerves had gotten the better of her. The police informed her they would continue to monitor the area, but the monotone in which he said it convinced Nora he was just repeating the approved party line for her benefit. He made a point of telling her before she left that she should in fact run away from imaginary burglars and not towards them. Odell looked at her meaningfully, clearly intimating an "I told you so" before dragging her off to hail a cab. Odell chattered in the cab about how Nora owed her a proper night out and speculated aloud about the man she had met at the bar. Nora nodded along, too tired to protest, her mind replaying the moment in the back alley on repeat. It seemed impossible that she had imagined him, but Odell was observant, and it wasn't like her to miss things. Still, she couldn't help picturing the tense set of the man's shoulders before he had bolted. Nora told herself that her heart only hammered at the image from the adrenaline of the chase, but something in her was drawn to the stranger. She forced herself not to think about who the man might be or where she could find him as she fell into bed. 2. Nora marched down the hallway at work, an hour later than she normally liked to arrive at the office. She clutched a full cup of black coffee in one hand and felt vindicated by her usual insistence on not going out on a weeknight. When she reached the door to the basement office, she paused with her hand on the knob, looking down the hallway to where she'd spotted this strange man the night before. In the bright fluorescent lights and the hustle and bustle of her coworkers arriving, it was easy to believe she had imagined him. Still, the image of him frozen in the alley stuck in her mind. Shaking her head, she pushed into her office to face her workday. Her morning at the office ended up keeping Nora busy enough that she didn't have time to ponder the incident beyond a cursory assurance to her office mates that the security breach had been dealt with. Despite feeling exhausted after an eventful night, Nora threw herself into finishing the project still on her workbench and completing her inventory of all the weapons and artifacts being restored by her team. She needed to prioritize the restoration of the classical Greek sword and spear due to arrive the following week. She was torn away from the task of cleaning a 12th century Zweihander by a friendly voice. "Nora, are you going to take a lunch break or just keep plowing through like there is no tomorrow?" Nora's coworker, Mandy, stood propped against the edge of her workbench. Her arms were folded, but her thin, dark eyes were full of kindness. "You should definitely take a lunch break," Mandy continued. "You look like you've been run over by a dump truck." "Thank you, Mandy," Nora said dryly. "But haven't you heard? It's all the rage. Everybody is trying to look like they just crawled out of a dumpster." She began pulling off the gloves she donned to clean the sword and shoved some escaped curls from her face. Mandy let out a giggle. "No, I just mean that you seem like you could use a break. Seriously, you were looking really glazed over. You feeling all right?" Nora shrugged. "I'm fine. Just had to come in late last night to deal with that security alert. Didn't end up getting very much sleep." Mandy frowned. "I was hoping you were going to tell me you had a wild night on the town, or maybe that you went on a date last night." "Well, I was actually out celebrating with my sister before work interrupted." "Odell finally manages to drag you out for some laughs, and the first chance you get, you run back to the office." Mandy pursed her lips in disapproval. "Can you ever enjoy yourself?" "I was enjoying myself, but I'll never pass up an opportunity to get ahead and make a good impression." "Get ahead? Nora, you have the promotion in the bag. You don't have to solve every single problem for everybody." Nora shrugged and tugged at the hem of her chunky sweater. "I've been passed up for opportunities for stupid political reasons before." Mandy gave a long, suffering sigh. "They aren't going to pass you up for a promotion for taking a lunch break. Now go and take your time. I'll hold down the fort around here." Nora gave Mandy a mock salute before pushing her way out of the cramped basement office. She made her way down the narrow hallway to the stairs and climbed up into the museum proper, considering making her way to the cafeteria. It was Tuesday, which meant they'd be serving tacos, and melty queso sounded fantastic to Nora in her exhausted and irritable state. As she wove through the crowds of visitors milling about, it struck Nora that she hadn't spent any time in the exhibits while they were open to the public in weeks. She momentarily let herself drift with the crowds towards the section under the banner reading "Ancient Arms and Armaments." She made her way past the familiar cases filled with all manner of arrowheads, daggers, and antique revolvers, until she found herself propped in a doorway across from the case containing artifacts originating from Greek and Roman empires. As Nora observed the people milling through the exhibit, her attention caught on a tall man paused in front of the case containing the hoplite armor. He had been standing in front of it for longer than was typical for the casual museum patron, and the crowds were forced to part and flow around him as if he were a boulder in a stream. Nora pushed off the doorway she had been leaning on and took a step closer to the man. She told herself she was doing her job as a museum worker by answering patrons' questions about artifacts, but something in the set of his shoulders drew her in. As she stepped up next to him, she commented, "It's a fascinating collection, isn't it?" Apparently, her attempt at a casual conversation starter was off base because he started violently. He jumped backwards, and his hands flew to his bag as if prepared to draw a weapon of his own. Before Nora could apologize for startling him, however, his wide russet eyes softened, and the tension in his stance faded. "I was not expecting you," the man said, as he smoothed the lapels of his blazer. "I'm sorry for surprising you," Nora apologized, tilting her head up to meet his eyes, something she wasn't accustomed to given her stature. "I promise I don't make a habit of sneaking up on unsuspecting museum patrons. This is a one-time thing." The man's eyes narrowed behind his round glasses. "Museum patrons? Do you work here?" "I'm one of the weapons experts." "Do you happen to be Nora?" It was Nora's turn to be startled, and she shifted from foot to foot as she responded, "Yes. Have we met?" Perhaps he was a benefactor she had spoken to at a museum fundraiser, but it seemed unlikely. Nora would have remembered somebody with a jawline as sharp as his. He shook his head, making the curls on his forehead flop back and forth. "No, but I can't believe my luck in running into you." Nora was saved from struggling to form an adequate response when the man barreled on to explain himself. "You see, I've been doing some extensive research on weaponry from this era, and I kept coming across your name. I came here today to continue my research, but I never considered I might get lucky enough to actually meet you." Nora's mind warred with itself on whether she should be flattered or unsettled, so the only thing she could think to say was, "Well, here I am." "Here you are indeed." In the silence following his odd statement, the battle between unease and flattery intensified until her stomach fluttered. The warm color of his eyes was pushing her towards flattered, but Nora reminded herself that she was at work. Distracting herself, she asked, "So what exactly did you come here to study?" The man tore his gaze away from her and turned back to the case of hoplite armor. "You see, I'm a literature professor at Northwestern University here in the city. I focus on classics, with a particular emphasis on the works of ancient Greece. I had read in the paper about the new weapons that would be arriving here, and I was curious if your team would be interested in a sort of professional collaboration for the sake of research." Nora chewed at her perpetually chapped bottom lip as she considered. A partnership in academia could be valuable to her research, but it hadn't been remotely what she'd expected when she decided to approach a museum visitor on a whim. "Do you have a business card?" she hedged. The man rifled in his weathered leather messenger bag and surfaced with a card, which he offered to Nora. "Dr. Adam Scott," she read aloud. "At your service," he responded with an inclination of his head. For all his forwardness, he was decidedly charming. Nora dug into her own crammed purse. It took her a few moments, but she located one of her own business cards and offered it to Adam. He peered down at it and commented, "Zvezda. That's an interesting last name." "It's Russian, constantly getting mispronounced." "Nora, I'd love to grab some tea together and discuss how we might be able to assist one another with our research." He nodded towards a small cafe at the end of the gallery. Nora shook her head. "I only came up here to grab some lunch, and I have to be getting back down to the office soon. You can email me, though." "In that case, I look forward to seeing you soon." He offered her his hand to shake, and Nora took it after the slightest of hesitations, finding his skin warm and rough under her palm. The back of her neck tingled. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Adam," she responded, releasing his hand and taking a step back. "The pleasure was all mine, Nora." Nora turned to walk away, but as she retreated, she felt his gaze trained on her for an inordinately long time. When she reached the bottom of the stairs that headed up towards the cafeteria, she glanced behind her, only to find he had turned back to the case of armor. He looked at the Corinthian helmet with bold red plumage with rapt attention, just as he had when she'd first approached him. She shook her head at the oddity of it all before marching up the stairs in pursuit of some tacos. Despite Mandy having encouraged her to take her time during lunch, Nora found herself back at her desk with her tacos. After her unusual interaction in the museum, she had opted to eat in the far less populated office, taking the opportunity to catch up on some related research. She browsed through articles pulled up on her phone and tried, but failed, not to get sour cream on the screen as she scrolled. She had just started in on an article detailing the use of DNA sequencing from animal hides to determine the geographical origins of shields in Africa, when the phone vibrated in her hand with an incoming call. Her heart stuttered in her chest at the name on the caller ID before her brows knit together in confusion. Drew Coleman. Her thumb hovered over the ignore button, but she didn't press it. They hadn't spoken since breaking things off months ago. It seemed odd that he would call her in the middle of the workday, unless it was something urgent. She answered the call and pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello?" "Nora?" came the gruff response. "What's wrong, Drew?" she asked, anxiety making her lunch sit uneasily in her belly. Drew's puzzled voice came through the receiver. "Wrong? How do you mean?" "You're calling me in the middle of the day after we haven't spoken in months. I figure something has happened." Nora leaned back in her desk chair and began picking at her sweater as she spoke. "Oh, no, nothing has happened. Nothing bad, at least." Drew paused, and his breath crackled through the receiver as he sighed. "I just saw the article in the newspaper about the project you are going to be spearheading, and I wanted to call and congratulate you. I know that must mean that promotion you wanted isn't far behind." "Oh, right, thanks. It was nice of you to call." Nora hedged. The line went quiet, and Nora swiveled her desk chair back and forth, unsure where to go from here. It seemed the world had conspired to fire awkward conversations at her when she was already tired and just trying to survive her day at the office. She was on the verge of telling him she had to get back to work when his soft voice interrupted her train of thought. "Nora, I miss you." It was Nora's turn to sigh and close her eyes. "I miss you too, Drew, but it doesn't change anything." "Not like that. I want kids, you don't. Breaking up was for the best." Drew stumbled on, the words falling out of his mouth. "But you're my best friend." Nora squeezed her eyes shut even more tightly and pinched the bridge of her nose. There was a pause, followed by a soft whump that sounded like Drew falling back onto a bed. I had to call. Last night at the hospital was rough. A bus wrecked and we had to treat half a dozen critical injuries. It left me so drained. I needed a friend, and you know me better than anyone. I don't want to lose that just because we aren't dating anymore." Nora chewed her bottom lip. "Well, I can still be your friend." "I'd like that." Nora heard the relief in Drew's tone. "Do you think you might come back to the pool league again? I promise not to make it awkward for you. I'd like to be able to talk to you again." "Are you sure you're ready to have me kick your ass at pool again? Haven't you been enjoying winning for the past few months?" Nora teased to lighten the mood. Drew scoffed on the other end. "I think you'll find I've learned some new tricks in the past few months. Might be able to give you a run for your money now." Nora chuckled before silence fell again. "In all seriousness, though," Drew continued, "it would be great to see you. I'm determined to make this breakup less awkward than my breakup with Jason. I had to run out of the library whenever he entered for a straight year." "I don't think it will be hard for me to behave better than Jason." "Good. Then I'll see you there soon. Tell Odell and Arena I say hello, okay?" "Of course. It was good to hear from you, Drew," Nora said before hanging up the phone. She turned back to her half-eaten plate of tacos. She was glad she had indulged and gotten queso. Even though that conversation had gone better than she could have hoped, she deserved a treat for all the curveballs life had been throwing at her in the past 24 hours. The rest of the week at work left Nora with very little time to worry about her personal life. On Thursday, the crates arrived from the excavation.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?